I'm joined on the line by Steve Hall. Steve, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Tony.
Steve, it's quite actually rather serendipitous having you on because you're a member of the Workers' Party, are you not?
I certainly am, yeah. And I'm feeling quite good today, as you can imagine.
Aren't you? Do you want to just take us through what you make of George's victory in Rochdale, George Galloway?
Well, it's a small crack in the neoliberal dam. Let's not get too excited right now. But it does show that there's resistance against this two-party duopoly, which are two cheeks of the same backside, the same global neoliberal backside that has been in power all over the Western world and has been causing trouble on the borders with the East since the late 1970s. And it shows that people in this country, certainly in the, I don't like to call them derelict areas because that's an insult to the people who live there, but they're certainly the old industrial zones that have been experiencing great problems since deindustrialization in the 1980s, that they've had enough of the whole thing. Brexit was one example. I think that was a protest vote. I don't think there was an awful lot of, economic, political knowledge went into that vote. It's a protest because we've been in Europe for a long time since Jacques Delors, threw all that stuff at us in the 1990s. We've been in for a long time. We've been associated with Europe since, the late 1940s in one way. And it didn't really do anything. It didn't help us at all. We didn't deindustrialise.
Most people would say, Steve, most people would say the opposite, wouldn't they? I mean, it's been a period of deindustrialisation completely.
Well, it has.
I mean, in Bristol, for example, we were making more aircraft here than anywhere in the world at the beginning, or just at the end of the Second World War, being manufactured here and flying off, to do their dirty deeds wherever. But now there's absolutely nothing, not in the whole country.
Nothing. And up north here in Sunderland, we made these famous cargo ships selling all over the world. We had the huge Swan Hunters, once made the largest ships in the world. We had heavy industry all over the place. And if you look at the Maastricht Treaty, the rules that Europe threw at us was, this competition laws, fiscal responsibility. You can only spend 3% of GDP, which is ridiculous when you consider how much we invested in our country after the 1945. Between 1945 and 1960, we had the highest growth since the early 19th century. So Europe was a weight on our shoulders, and throwing it off was an opportunity. Of course, with Tories in power, we missed that opportunity because we went straight out of the frying pan of Europe into the fire of the global investors who now control which regions rise or fall. These private equity corporations with the huge institutional funds, pension funds, insurance funds, and they're leveraging a lot of money in as well, making their own bets. They don't tell you how much. I'd like to know. And we're under their cosh all the time. So we have I think that what we could call a democratic deficit and a sovereign deficit in this country. We're basically not in charge of our own country. And that's something we need to put right.
That's one of the reasons that was people voted for Brexit, probably one of the main reasons, that and immigration.
Yeah.
Now, look, you've come up with this book, The Death of the Left, and in a way it's a terrible thing to be discussing your book on the day when George Galloway comes back to the Houses of Parliament. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself and some of your background that you decided to write this?
Yeah, well, I was brought up in the old steel town of Consett in County Durham, and after Margaret Thatcher's victory in 1979, soon after she abandoned capital controls and capital exchange controls and allowed money to flow out of the country. Of course, capital controls are one of the fundamental planks of that had kept this country since 1945. They closed the steelworks, putting 10,000 out of work overnight. Steelworks plus ancillary industries. So I got the sharp end of deindustrialization as a young man watching it happen. It was quite incredible. The steelworks covered 4.5 square miles. It was the largest steelworks in Europe. It had been a way of life there since the 1840s, since the iron foundry was set up in 1840. And on being on the sharp end of that made me realize that there are people in charge of the global economy who don't really care about working people. They don't care about us at all. So I was a musician at the time. I was involved in the miners' strike, of course, because of the closing the mining industry as well. Some of the mines were exhausted. for an awful lot longer. They should have, and I saw the sharp end of deindustrialization. I saw the weakness of politicians when Ben failed to get in, and we ended up with Kinnock, and of course Blair, and after the Thatcherites had been ousted, and I just felt totally powerless and unrepresented. So I decided to leave the music industry and became an academic. I worked in the Northeast all my life, family up here. I didn't want to travel, so I worked at the University of Durham and Teesside and Northumbria. And eventually I ended up working in the criminology department, but really my background is in sociology and economic history. Don't ask me why a job came up, I took it. I ended up in the criminology department writing about the relationship between economic change and levels of crime and changes in the criminal justice system. And, I've always, I suppose that politicized me, seeing deindustrialization, seeing the ways of life completely thrown in the dustbin over the 80s and 90s. And I became sort of highly political animal at the time. And I wanted to see serious change. I must admit, I voted for Tony Blair. I have to make that confession. It's cathartic making that confession.
Yeah, I bet you probably had a glass of champagne that night, didn't you? I bet.
Well, not champagne up here, Tony.
A pint of mild.
Not even mild. That's a Midlands thing.
Nuki Brown.
Absolutely. No, I had a pint of something. I can't remember what it was. I think it was Duke's Ale, and had a few actually. I thought that was a great thing, but of course Blair was a huge letdown. We realised that Blair was a devout neoliberal, and we got years of Margaret Thatcher Mark II.
Yeah, we did. Well, anyway, look, on your book, your chapter 2 is about democracy, entitled Democracy Without the People, the Rise and Fall of Left Populism. Now, this populism term is something I find a bit irritating because, of course, the idea is that we want leaders to be popular. Actually, over in Russia, their president is popular. A lot of people think he's great and vote for him and this sort of thing. Whereas over here, the attitude seems to be, number one, a lot of people don't want to vote, as we saw in Rochdale, and as we'll no doubt see in the general election. But one of the reasons people do come out and vote in this country is to try and stop the worst of the two or whatever candidates getting in. So what do you mean about the rise and fall of left populism?
Well, we don't mean populism. We're not using the word as a pejorative at all. In fact, later on in the book, we talk about the history of populism in the West, particularly William Jennings Bryan's Populist Party of America.
You say we? Did you write this with someone else?
Simon Winlow and I, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to tell us a little bit about him?
Oh, him? Yes. Oh, well, he's a Mackham. He's a Sunderland lad. So we follow rival football teams, but we're the best of mates. Simon's another professor of criminology. He's a bit younger than me, still working. I'm retired. Unfortunately, he still has to work for a living. And we had very, very similar backgrounds. He's from Sunderland, just along the road. He saw the huge Austin Pickers Guild shipyards and the glass factories and all the rest of their industry closed. They got a little bit back with Nissan, of course, but that's another matter. And he has we both have very similar backgrounds. That's where
okay, so can you just tell us about this left populism? What do you mean by that?
Well, populism was a bona fide political position throughout the 19th century. If you look at, for instance, Henry Hyman's Social Democratic Federation in this country, William Jennings Bryan, Populist Party in America, they were sort of democratic socialist stroke social democratic parties. And populism didn't have this bad name. So it was given a bad name by neoliberals. And the problem is that we regard neoliberals as this modern, something, a political movement that came on the scene and just appeared out of nowhere in 1979. If we look at the history of neoliberalism, we can trace it back to the decline of the Habsburg Empire in the early 1920s. It's a project. They put themselves across as, an organic development of markets, some like the sort of natural laws of the universe. Markets are going to give us this sort of political system. In fact, it's been a project. It was heavily funded in the 1920s by the Ford Rockefeller Foundations. They met in Paris and Walter Lippmann Colloquium in 1938. And they now have so much control over mass media and academia that they can label populism. They can turn that into a pejorative. It was never a pejorative in the 19th century and in the early 20th century. Populism was about popular democracy. And a lot of the policies, if you look at Heineman's policies, if you look at Bryan's policies in America, they're very much the same sort of policies that Roosevelt put into practice in the 1930s, and Attlee and Bevan and the two Bevans, of course, put into practice in this country after 1945. So populism, we don't mean populism as a pejorative. We regarded Corbyn and Sanders in the USA, I think we misread him slightly, as populist, because they were trying to appeal to the broad working class in the way that the left had failed to do since the inception of the new left in after 1968.
Okay, well, look, let's cut to the chase here, because you've got another chapter here, wrong turns. I think most of us have got our own idea of what the Corbynist Labour Party did wrong and how it was undermined, etc. But, I think it's quite clear that Corbyn and Seamus Milne did take some fairly serious wrong turns. What do you think they were?
Well, they failed to live up to their populist credentials. They were supposed to be, in 2016, when Corbyn was, flavour of the month, everyone was rejoining the Labour Party and paying their £3 membership fee or whatever. He did make a lot of noises about supporting the working class, about regional banks, about economic development. Sanders was making the same noises in the United States of America. And people were convinced, and there was a coming together of the left, the progressive new left, the sort of identity politics left, the momentum left, and the old traditional working class came together. The thing is, when you keep talking about economic issues, that's when left does come together. It's when you start talking about culture that they fly apart. So that was good. And then over time, momentum became more popular. Milne and his sort of middle-class latte drinking liberals became their voice became louder in Corbyn's party, and they started talking about identity politics, and they started to really move Corbyn away from what we call the popular classes, about the ordinary working class. They were interested in jobs, they're interested in industry, and they're interested in schools, education, health, all the rest of these basic things that the Workers' Party still talks about. They start talking about industrialisation, they talk about health service, they talk about the services that we need in this country. If Corbyn had stuck to that, and if he hadn't listened to his advisors, the three amigos, Portes, Medway, and Ren Lewis, who told him...
Sorry, can you just say who these people tell us a bit more about those three?
Absolutely.
Their full names, yeah?
Yeah, Jonathan Portes, academic, James Medway, academic, and Simon Ren Lewis, professor of economics at Oxford. He used to work for the Treasury. The only professor in Oxford I know who hasn't even got a PhD. But they told Corbyn, in the same way that Europe was telling Britain that you can't spend money without causing inflation. And John MacDonald, who really doesn't know an awful lot about economics, even though he was the Shadow Chancellor, swallowed that. And they started reneging on they say, well, it's going to be 250 billion, but we can't spend it straight away. We might cause inflation. Of course, Rachel Reeves went across Wall Street a couple of months ago, got her instructions from the bankers over there, and came back and said, we can't spend any of this. We haven't got any money to spend, which is a complete nonsense, because nations have sovereign currency issues. We did this after World War II. We used public investment to kickstart the economy between 1945 and 1960. We had more economic growth in that period. Funded a lot of it, about at least 40% of it, I think. I'm not sure about that figure entirely, don't quote me, about 40% funded by public investment.
Okay, Steve, I'm just going to ask Martin to chip in here. This whole sort of trick of Rachel Reeves zipping over to the States in order to get her orders does sound a little bit like this is the sort of reason that people may not want to vote for this Starmer-right Labour Party.
Well, I think she's nailed her colours to the mast. I mean, Yanis Varoufakis had a very good article in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago, because she was talking about maxing out the national credit card. And I'm quite sure that Steve will know that that's if you know anything about economics, as you clearly do, that's just wrong. And, you know, people like Simon Wren-Lewis on his blog go on about how wrong this is. I read his blog, and he's been pointing out how wrong Rachel is to come out with that stuff. And, of course, she will come to power as Shadow Chancellor, and she'll be forced to increase public expenditure because we've got a global capitalist crisis. There's no way they're going to be reducing it. The Japanese have been trying to reduce public expenditure since the 1980s. And every time they try and do it, the economy falls down the drain.
Well, it's no accident, is it, that she was one of the most vocal critics of Jeremy Corbyn, and she's now in charge. I mean, it almost seems theatrical. I'm reminded of Guy Debord and the Society of the Spectacle, you know, really sort of taking the mickey out of these people who don't actually seem to be in any way serious politicians. They seem to be playing games with the electorate. And you talk in another one of your chapters, Steve, about postmodernism, neoliberalism and the left. So this whole postmodernism idea incorporates all sorts, but one of the things is people will believe whatever it is we tell them to.
Well, sort of, yes. Oh, you've got me started now. I mean, postmodernism was fundamentally a French idea. Remember, well, I don't know how many of your listeners will remember the riots of 1968, but I'm sure most of them heard of the French riots. There could have been another revolution, but it stopped well short of that, of course. What happened was that the French intellectuals, who were always had powerful voices on the French political scene, had been for since the French Revolution, went out into the Renault factories and into the fields to talk to the workers, the French workers, and came back to Paris on the left back and decided they didn't like them. They decided the working class was no longer the agent of history. So you had Pierre Victor, you had Michel Foucault, you had all of these sort of former Maoists and Marxists all changing their tune because they decided they hate the workers. They said they're all drunken Catholics, sexist, racists, and too many traditional ideas, and they don't understand our fancy new theories. Debord wasn't one of these, by the way. Debord and Raoul van Eyck, the situation is sort of strange fish. I know quite a lot about them, but we'll leave that to one side at the moment. Foucault and the rest, of course, decided that the working class was no longer the agent of history, and now the marginalised, women, people with different ethnic backgrounds are the ones that the left should put should put their case to. And so we ended up with this thing called post-structuralism. So the class structure, which was about the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, a sort of basic Marxist division, and what we in Britain knew as the workers and the upper class twits, who we were supposed to be against. Remember old Dennis Skinner giving them hell in Westminster. So they decided that now that the working class was finished, and that was the beginning of the alienation of the left from the working class. And the working class aren't stupid; they caught onto this. They started to read working class, read the literature was saying in the papers, what the left was saying about them, and the left became this sort of finger-wagging schoolmaster or schoolmistress talking to you. Must change your habits. You must become more progressive. And we ended up with, because this was absorbed by the neoliberals. The neoliberals were watching this very, very carefully. The American CIA were avid watchers of the French postmodernists. It filtered over the Atlantic. The Americans took it on board. And, of course, that filtered back over here from America through academia into the education system. And we ended up with this sort of identity politics, intersectional conflict where nobody agrees about everything, and all of our shared concerns, which were fundamentally economic, all got lost in this forest of identity politics, and that kiboshed the left in America and Britain. Of course, it filtered across into Europe as well.
Yeah, so I mean, what sounds to me what you're saying is that there was sabotage, some form of sabotage. But anyway, I mean, these people may have been well-intentioned. They may also have been rather helped on their way by the ruling classes that they were trying to undermine. Who knows? And yeah, you're right. Guy Debord and the Situationists were very much, they were trying to do what I do, I suppose, every week, which is to show up this kind of pantomime side of things. And the idea is that we actually want people in power who are going to make the decisions which are going to be good for us, for our kids, etc. And there's this constant pressure by the ruling classes in the economic system. Absolutely. Nowadays, of course, it's the sort of intelligence, techno community as well. So, we're talking about the mass media, web giants, these kinds of people, to just simply feed our heads full of rubbish, as Whitney Webb was saying in our first hour. But look, what I want to come round to here is, at the end of the day, it's really about, it's about economics. It's about where we get central government money from and what we do with it, whether we can actually manage to get ourselves a government that invests for the future of the country, for the population.
Absolutely
that isn't just in trying to spend money on weapons for Ukraine and this sort of thing. So, what do you make of that? Are there any voices out there making sense of this economic mission that the left should be on?
Well, of course, Winlow and I. I mean, in the final chapter, A Return to Economics, don't forget that the subtitle of the book is Why We Must Begin from the Beginning Again. We're not saying that the left is dead forever, but that version of the left that collapsed into this farrago of identity politics in the 80s and 90s, Judith Butler and all the rest. I recall a sentence from what's his name, Debord's Society of the Spectacle. The spectacle is that which avoids the work of men, or spit sexist, women as well, of course. So avoiding the work, what he meant was the political work. What you're saying is absolutely right. What we can work on, the foundation of all societies, is the economy. And that's what the left was about. Throughout the 19th century, early 20th century, right up to 1968, the left focused on the economy. And there are voices now trying to convince people, trying to tell people, instruct people how economies work. We have what's called a fiat monetary system now, which came about when Nixon abandoned Bretton Woods and the gold standard. We have floating exchange, floating currencies. We can do a lot with this money. The state is the sovereign issuer of currency, and we can invest as long as we invest in productive work. And that includes services, it includes new industry and services. As long as we invest to create more supply, we won't cause inflation by increasing the amount of money in circulation. Because the inflation myth, which goes back to Weimar, oh dear, we're going to create a new Weimar Republic or Venezuela or Zimbabwe. Inflation is fundamentally a supply side problem. The Weimar Republic were paying debts in foreign currencies. The French had taken over half their industry had collapsed, and the place was riddled with political corruption. And of course, they conquered inflation in 1925 by revaluing their currency. So inflation wasn't the reason Hitler got in. Hitler got in because between 1929 and 1933, after the Wall Street crash, Germany was cast into a pit of mass unemployment and poverty. That's why Hitler got in. So they blame all of this on inflation. They tell us lies about inflation. Friedman saying, that's about the quantity of money put into the system. That's always a reaction to supply-side problems. We saw supply-side problems during COVID. And that's what kicked off the inflationary spike we've just seen, because the supply chains were snarled up. So they tell us basically a pack of lies. As you say, misinformation, complete rubbish. We can use our currency to invest in our country, reboot the economy. We shouldn't have a manufacturing fetish, of course, because manufacturing these days isn't labour intensive. But we can invest in high-tech industry, productivity, better services, national health. The whole country needs repaving, for God's sake. Well, I mean, but one of the things that, I don't know what you make of this, one of my bugbears is that the actual cost of living is really what it's all about. We need to reduce to a minimum things like mortgage repayments, rents, all the, electricity costs, gas costs, transport costs, all these things that we need just to literally tick over week after week have been cranked up by the rentiers. Because they only have one solution, which is central bank raising interest rates. What does that do? It makes mortgages more expensive. It collapses businesses who can't borrow. It makes house rents more expensive. So the working people are punished. And they're punished for one reason only, is that money has three functions. It's basically a unit of exchange. It's a medium of exchange. It's a unit of account. It's a store of value. The people who use money as a store of value, who hoard it and lend it out for compound interest repayments, they're the ones who use money as a store of value. So they're protecting their savings and they're protecting their loan repayments, because they want their loan repayments to be worth as much in 5 and 10 years' time as they are when they made the loan. So they're the ones who are benefiting from raising interest rates. Everyone else suffers. And you impose austerity on a country, you collapse business, you make everything more expensive, and of course, then they push up prices, which is always the initial cause of inflation. They start pushing up prices. We've had a recent report saying that the luxury market is now pushing up price because the rich don't care about price increases, and so they're just buying more of this luxury stuff, and they're the ones really at this very moment risking a return to inflation.
Yeah. Anyway, I think because of George, I think we should almost doff our caps to George Galloway for his persistence, and also for obviously a very, very hard campaign that they fought in Rochdale. I mean, they popped this on probably at 2:00 in the morning on the mainstream press. I've heard very little of this. I was twiddling around this morning and over lunchtime to try and hear, is George Galloway anywhere speaking? Couldn't hear him. So it's almost as if the mainstream media disinformation has sort of kicked off at 2 a.m. about who George Galloway is and what he stands for. So let's have a listen now to his acceptance speech, which is interrupted briefly by Just Stop Oil, who see him as very pro, or he's not as into this whole zero carbon agenda as they are. So yes, I groaned as well when I saw that. I thought this is typical, isn't it? It's a little bit like the Cyanim turning up at when we had a Hezbollah newspaper editor speaking in Bristol. The Zionists turn up to just disrupt it. But anyway, you'll hear a brief bit of disruption. But here's George Galloway's acceptance and victory speech, which he read out in Rochdale. Well, he didn't read out. He talks from the top. He's not a script reader, a bit like the old Jack Hargreaves on the television on Out of Town. He speaks from the heart.
Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. You have paid and you will pay a high price for the role that you have played in enabling, encouraging, and covering for the catastrophe presently going on in occupied Palestine in the Gaza Strip. Rochdale Town Councillors, I put you on notice now that I hope to put together a grand alliance of all the parties to remove I want to put the town councillors on notice that we intend to clean the town hall clock. I make, of course, no disrespect to the returning officer and his fine staff who ran this campaign today and this count this evening virtually flawlessly, nor any public servant in the town hall. But the councillors have to go, and I intend to try to put together a grand alliance that will change Rochdale for the better just 12 weeks from now at the local elections. I thank God for this great victory. I thank my wife, my 6 children, my 5 grandchildren, who've all been working in this campaign. I thank my agent, my campaign manager, my dear friend and wise counsel, Imtiaz. I thank all of my campaign team for the phenomenal work that they did. I thank the people of Rochdale who voted for me in such numbers, but promised to work faithfully for all Rochdalians and to work for the day where you can again be born in Rochdale. Again be born in Rochdale. I want to tell Mr. Starmer above all that the plates have shifted tonight. And as Jacob Rees-Mogg just said on television, in talking of me as a parliamentary orator of note, that Keir Starmer's problems just got 100 times more serious than they were before today. This is going to spark a movement, a landslide, a shifting of the tectonic plates in scores of parliamentary constituencies, beginning here in the North West, in the West Midlands, in London, from Ilford to Bethnal Green and Bow. Labour is on notice that they have lost the confidence of millions of their voters who loyally and traditionally voted for them generation after generation. I've heard some of the narrative being spun around this election result this evening. Yes, it's true that every Muslim is bitterly angry at Keir Starmer and his misnamed Labour Party. But you would be very foolish if you did not realise that millions of other citizens of our country are too. Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak are two cheeks of the same backside, and they both got well and truly spanked tonight here in Rochdale. Finally, I congratulate David Tully on his remarkable achievement. His remarkable achievement in coming second in this by-election. That even the journalist in the room will realise that this is the first time ever in British political history that the two big parties of the state were thoroughly and soundly beaten. And I think that that will not have been missed in Downing Street and wherever Keir Starmer currently hangs out. I look forward to working with Mr. Tully, and I hope he'll join the Grand Alliance to wipe Rochdale's town hall clean, because this town has been badly let down. Once one of the most prosperous towns in England, now one of the poorest, whose heart has been piece by piece removed. The maternity, the A&D. I understand you can't even be locked up in Rochdale. There's not even a jail cell to toss a miscreant in. Mr. Danchuk might be glad to hear it. But the biggest new threat that we face is the possibility of the extinction of the proud Rochdale Football Club. And I pledge that I will work tirelessly, I hope with the Town Council, as changed, in 12 weeks' time, to save the Dale. God bless you. God bless Rochdale. God bless Gaza.
So there's George Galloway there with his... Marty, do you want to explain the joke about Simon Danchuk he's talking about there, who was stood for the Reform Party?
Yeah, well, Danchuk was previously the Labour MP for Rochdale, and he got booted out, I believe, because he was sexually harassing some underage person. I think it was a girl, I'm not sure. But anyway, he stood for the Reform Party as an ex-Labour person, and, he didn't do very well. So there you are.
So the figures were share of the vote for the Workers' Party, George Galloway, 40%, for David Tully, who's an independent, he was just referring to there, just over 21%. The Tory was 12%. Ashar Ali, 7.7%, who I'd initially heard was polling pretty much level with Galloway. No, definitely not. He was down at about 8%. The Lib Demi and Donaldson at 7%, and Simon Janchuk for Reform UK just over 6%. The point he's making there, Steve, is I think that this whole idea of Team A, Team B political parties controlling Westminster, this is sending a very clear message that that's over.
Yes, I think so, and I think that most are experienced and now know that the duopoly isn't on their side. It's not. It hasn't got any real good intentions towards the working people of this country.
I mean, the point, of course, is about Rochdale, one of the most prosperous cities in the country, now one of the poorest.
Yes, didn't the co-op originate in
Yep,
Rochdale?
that's right,
Cooperative society, yes. It always a prosperous place. We had prosperous places all over the north of England, Tony, and I remember visiting them, many of them as a child. But what I would like to say, that was a great speech by George. We've got one of British politics' best orators back in Parliament, which is a great thing. And I wouldn't like to be in Keir Starmer's shoes at the moment, I'll tell you that. But what I'd like to say is that the Workers' Party is also a very serious party. If anyone visits our website, we have a 10-point programme. You can buy a copy of the manifesto very cheaply. We're constantly working on it. We're setting up policy committees to look at how, if you look at the 10-point programme, it's about renationalisation of utilities. It's about clean energy. It's about boosting the economy of this country. It's about better education system. It's about refunding the National Health Service, putting it back on its feet. We have some serious economic policies. We have some very good brains in the party who know how economics works. And we're a serious party, and we hope to have other victories in places like Rochdale throughout the country, and eventually have some say in Parliament about how the economy of Britain is run and managed.
Well, I'm very happy because the left seems to be now doing what the right was doing with the UKIP and the Brexit Party, and actually getting active and actually, they're getting into Parliament too with good old George. And one of his lieutenants, I think we could call him, is the former MP for Derby, Chris Williamson. He was also, I think, the former leader of Derby City Council for the Labour Party until he started supporting Palestine. And of course, the usual happened is he's getting removed. And in fact, it's amazing that people like Jeremy Corbyn at the top of the Labour Party at the time didn't actually stand up for him. I remember there's a brilliant article by Neil, second name escapes me, who talked about the Shakespearean tragedy of Jeremy Corbyn, who treated his enemies better than he treated his friends. So there's one of the major mistakes that Corbyn made. But anyway, here's Chris Williamson now speaking about this just before the announced result on I think it was on the BBC or Sky.
Well, I think they knew they were on course to lose and lose badly. So by disowning their candidate, it sort of give them a get-out-of-jail card. But I don't think people are falling for that. What we believe we've seen here is a total rejection of the mainstream political party. Party politics, in my opinion, is on the way to its grave, and which is where it belongs. Because, frankly, as George has said, two cheeks of the same backside. We deserve better than that. We deserve a proper democracy, and in elections, people deserve a choice. And when the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are effectively offering the same thing, we're effectively in a one-party state. And that's why people, I think, are looking for an alternative. And as I say, that's what George Galloway and the Workers' Party provides.
So is that pretty much just setting out your stall, Steve?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Chris is one of the most honest and morally upstanding politicians we've ever seen in this country. These are the sort of people. It began with Tony Benn and Peter Shaw being sort of attacked by the SDP split, and then Kinnock getting in 83, wasn't it? And we saw the really good, honest, intelligent, knowledgeable politicians being pushed out of the Labour Party to give us this sort of stage show of Blair and Mandelson and the rest of these rather weird characters who really were never serious politicians.
But watching that on Sky last night before the result, actually he seemed to know which way things were going. Chris Williamson had a bit of a twinkle in his eye.
Absolutely. Well, he did, and Chris is, he's au fait with economics, so how to put the country back on its feet. A number of us in the party know how to do this, and I hope we can go on to win more parliamentary seats. And I'm not a big fan of PR, Tony, but it wouldn't be a bad idea for a while to get to do a bit of power brokering, to get some independent voices into Parliament, and to push these these dead mainstream parties further to the margins. Power broking, some people argue that in Italy nothing ever gets done, but I think we could run it differently in this country, and we could start to get some sensible voices in Parliament.
Look, I'm going to be back on its feet. Very unkind to you now, and I'd like you to comment, if you don't mind, on the farmer protest. I certainly hadn't asked you about it beforehand, but we've seen a massive protest this week. Yesterday, so that's Thursday, outside the Senedd in Cardiff by the Welsh farmers. Yeah. They are absolutely disgusted by the Labour, the way that the Labour Party over in Wales is telling farmers that, for example, they've got to take 20% of their land out of circulation. They're not allowed to use it for farming anymore. Well, hang on a minute. This is... many of these farmers are saying, well, they're already finding it difficult to make a living, to pay mortgages or whatever it happens to be, to make farming pay. And so we're going to hear now from outside the Senedd, which wasn't carried live, unfortunately. It was some fantastic speeches from various of the farmers. So I hope you don't mind me asking, is it okay to ask you about this?
Well, it is, and I make a general point, of course, that the farmers in this country, in Holland, across Europe, the Canadian truckers are denounced as populists. Do you remember the Gilets jaunes a few years ago? They were a compendium of French workers who were just fed up with the whole neoliberal thing. They're fed up with rising interest rates, mortgages they couldn't afford, cost of living. Everything's austerity, everything's going wrong, and there's no need for this. So yes, I sympathise with the Welsh farmers greatly.
Well, let's actually have a listen to them.
We shouldn't be telling farmers how to run the.
Well, I mean, they seem to be quite good at actually producing food, and the idea that they're now being made bankrupt. Well, of course, this is all wonderful for the private equity firms that want to buy up
land, like Bill Gates has done in the United States.
Exactly.
He's built up thousands of acres of land. They did this in Romania years ago. In fact, they did this in Poland 200 years ago, which caused a huge... We've had land enclosures for a long time. Huge, wealthy people buying up land and mismanaging it.
It seems to me that both in urban and rural areas, the people who are losing their homes, that can't afford to pay their mortgages in the urban areas, and also the farmers being forced out too, well, of course, that land is going to go to somebody. It's going to go to those people that don't pay any tax and are awash with cash, like Larry Fink,
Absolutely.
BlackRock, Vanguard, and the rest of them. Anyway, let's go over yesterday live outside the Senedd in Cardiff Bay.
So I'm a fifth-generation farmer from mid-Wales. I'm farming sheep, cattle and free-range hens. And there's a couple of reasons I'm here. I've got a 2-year-old son sitting at home who loves every minute of being on the farm. And I am fighting for his future on that farm. I'm also here to make sure us farmers stick together and unite through this time of hardship. Regardless of who we are, where we come from, what we farm or what we believe in. Now is the time to stick together. I'm very nervous, I'm just a farmer, so bear with me.
It's all right, mate.
I look around here in the crowd and you're all like me. You're just fighting for our right to produce food in Wales. These new schemes and incentives that are getting pushed upon us are here for one thing and one thing only, to kill us off. And I say enough is enough.
Way! Nice one, mate. Someone speaking some sense.
The government tell us we need to work better with nature and fight a climate crisis. So I parked in Adam Street and I've walked to the Senedd today through about 10 tonne of litter.
True that.
Farmers are the heart and soul of our local communities, and I, for one, are fed up of being treated like the villain. Where do the people thinking up these schemes think their food is going to come from when there's farms ravaged by TB and we're busy pruning trees?
Yeah. That's it, man.
Not only are we fighting for our farms, we're fighting for our communities, our local shops, our local schools, our markets, and everything in between. How many non-farmers are going to go to Winstay and CCF to keep them afloat? We've just had to listen to 4 politicians promise the world and try and get your support just for votes. Well, I challenge each and every one of you to actually stick to your promises, get out of the cycle, and do something. I got asked yesterday, is this a protest, a threat to the Welsh Government? And I had no idea how to answer. So I'll tell you this, Welsh Government. Look at us all here today, together as one. There are thousands of us here fighting for the same thing, to ensure our future in farming. And if you don't start working with us, this is just the beginning.
So that's recorded in Cardiff, Wednesday, I think, not yesterday. Maybe you could say something, what you make of this whole thing, Steve. It's probably the first time in several generations that between 3,000 and 4,000 farmers were all gathered there in Cardiff Bay together.
Yes, I think they have every right to do that, because what we're seeing now is a centralised command economy. One of the worst things about the Soviet Union was Gosplan, the central command economy, trying to second guess what everyone needs to buy on a daily basis, and sending commands to the production system to produce this. It just didn't work. You have people queuing up for sausages in a shop in Vladivostok, and a lorry load of boot polish would arrive because someone's made a mistake. Now, we haven't got a communist central command economy. What we now have are the WEF, Schwab, and the neoliberals, the private equity corporations. We have a central command capitalist economy, and they're basically looking to carve up farmland. Fink and his pals are already in Ukraine looking to buy up farmland in Ukraine after the war. They're already planning things in Gaza development. They've bought up most of Patagonia in Argentina, and now that lunatic Milei is trying to, is threatening to sell the rest of Argentina off to these people. This is a global money management, global investment corporations who are looking to buy up, and they're bankrupting small businesses, they're putting workers out of work, they're deindustrializing where they want and industrializing places where they have cheap wages and cheap materials. They're doing what they want in this world. And they're doing what they want because they've disempowered politics and politicians. The democratic deficit is something they've organised over the past 40 years.
No, well, I agree with you. Anyway, I just want to crack on because I've got another farmer here about to speak.
I want to be positive because I want to see a future for my children on the land, farming and producing food. So I'm going to tell you a story that started a month ago on my phone, on WhatsApp. I wish I hadn't opened it now. 2 men standing over there, Gwyn and Rhys. They're the boys that started Digon, you Digon, enough is enough. And I want you to put your hands together for them boys.
Yeah!
They planted a seed in a field that was south-facing in good soil. And that seed's here now. That seed has grown into an oak because everybody travelled, everybody came here for a reason. Because we love. That's why people get fed. I will tell you, my father, but he's never been abroad. And he said to me when they brought this, 10% trees, I haven't worked this land, and my forefathers have, for people to come here and plant trees. Because we've worked our hands to the bone to get that land to produce food. A ma hwnna'n bwysig. Ein tir ni dio. It's our land. And we produce the food. And let me tell you, I've got a few followers and everybody's behind us. The general public understand that they're going to need a farmer once, twice or 3 times every day of their lives. And if we don't stick together, and it's been a tough month for me, I will tell you, I nearly walked away. But we will be strong. We will stick together, drive forward. And I'm going to be honest with you now, it's time for change. Digon, you digon. Awn ni adlaf and I will go home from here with our hearts full of joy. We have done something special. Da ni di wneud rhywbeth fe da ni gofio am yn oes for the rest of our lives. We were part of a farming food revolution, and we will bring this to the nation, to the people, and feed them sustainably, environmentally friendly and affordably. Dwi'm yn mynd I fel y cachod yn mwy. Diolch o galon. A diolch I chi am be da chi'n neud. Hefo'ch gilydd, da ni'n mynd I neud gwahaniaeth. Together, we will make a difference. Diolch yn fawr.
Wow. Wow. Well, that's quite a feeling, a sort of vibe coming out from the Welsh farmers there. What's the bigger agenda, Steve, going on here? I mean, it's obviously lovely to hear the Welsh language there, and lovely to see all these people coming together. But it's almost as if they're saying, well, we're going to have to go round this Welsh government. They're in the way.
I think so, and this is a classic case of recognition of the democratic deficit and the need to replace the government and the powers. Let's be honest, the government isn't in charge of this country. The government are working on behalf of bankers, private equity corporations. We see Ray Reeves as an ex-banker. We see Theresa May's husband was Margaret Thatcher. Dennis Thatcher was a banker. That's who we're. These are the people pulling the strings. And the Welsh farmer, that was a great speech, by the way, saying this land is our land. It reminds me of Woody Guthrie's song, this land is our land. Yes. And it should be our land. But the problem is it isn't. And to get this land back and to start to manage this country, manage its economy on behalf of the people, we need a democratic government, economically literate government that knows exactly. Yeah,
it's serving us rather than the private equity. So absolutely. We've also got, I mean, there's something interesting also going on here. So in terms of civilization, what does that mean? Well, one of the things it means is a food surplus, and the farmers provide that, but they're being attacked. We also, in order to have a civilization, we've got to have decent housing and some sort of infrastructure in the cities. Well, all that's being undermined and under attack, Martin. I mean, largely, this has got quite a lot to do with 2008, don't you think? The bailouts, Gordon Brown's bailouts, and also there were further bailouts under the cover of COVID, actually in 2019, which weren't really properly. So what's happened is the entire system, particularly local government and regional government, has been plunged into a debt trap.
Well, that's right, and of course the farmers protesting there, one of the big things that have been hitting them is the increase in energy prices, which is directly caused by the US blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline in the Baltic Sea. I mean, the dogs in the street know what goes on and what imperialism actually is. The European economy is about to be plunged into depression by the Americans so that they can cannibalise everything that they can take.
Well, one of the main things is the price.
This is a wartime situation.
One of the main things is the fuel prices, and what they're saying is that you're going to have to get rid of your diesel tractors and get electric ones.
Yeah, I understand.
The farmers don't believe that that's realistic.
I understand there's arguments about the net zero and planting trees and so on, but I think you've got to recognise that farmers in developed countries like Britain and Germany are subsidised. If there was a free market, a global free market, we'd be buying all of our stuff from New Zealand, Australia and Argentina.
And Russia.
As we used
Russia.
And Russia, of course, except if we were allowed to buy their stuff. I think
well, we should be. I mean, this is partly what it is. It's a lot of these sanctions, really. So it's a form of protectionism, isn't it?
Well, of course it is. And it's actually worked very well for the Russian farming now is not family farming, and it's not cooperative farming as it used to be, the sovkhoz and so on. It's actually big private sector farms which are run for profit, but they're modelled on what used to happen in the Soviet Union. So if you think about Russia, it's a very flat place, and the skills of individual farming have died a long time ago. But what they've done is turn what they have got into a world-beating system. And
well, it would beat the world if it was allowed to. But now they put them under sanctions.
They already are. They're selling a hell of a lot of food all over the world.
Steve, if you want to just sum up, and maybe you could also tell us about how we can get hold of your book.
Well, you can get a hold of our book from Bristol University Press, and all online and high street bookshops. If there are any high street bookshops.
Well, it's called The Death of the Left. You also got a subtitle, haven't you? What's that?
Well, why we must begin from the beginning again. In a sense, the subtitle's more important than the title, because we do in the final chapter suggest how we can reboot the British economy. And there are ways we can do this. This can be done. We've done it before. We did it in 1945. We can't do it in exactly the same way because we have different system, different circumstances. But we can do it. And we do make some very, very strong and clear suggestions about how we might do that.
OK, well, that's brilliant. Thank you, Steve Hall, very much for joining us. Just before the break, we've got a little poem about George Galloway from Patrizia Opulenza this week. It's called George Galloway, Orator for Palestine. George, in wait, has lain so long, a dish served cold to right the wrongs against him done by the Labour crew, who ousted George with much ado. On Iraq the facts he oft would speak, while Labour buried truth so deep. A killing spree in Iraq we saw, 1 million deaths and many more. TB, the Crim, who feasts on death, still believes he did his best. George, on truth, we always hear. On genocide, in Gaza, clear. The Workers' Party, in opposition to Labour's failings, this much is true. Smarma, in own foot, has shot, as lobbyists the power got. On free speech, we hear him swear, but define a woman, he will not dare. Candidates now dismissed at will, funding to the party still, from forces who pull rank, 'tis clear, Israel lobby, 'tis ever near. Symbolic now of anger felt on genocide in Gaza, melt. Wrath for every death now spills, votes for George, the people's will. The world has seen this genocide, Israel no more can try to beat us with their broken stick. The world now views Israel as sick. George the Dragon, seems, has slayed, as many prayers for him are made. No hissy fits or bumbled voices will stop the voters be swayed on choices. The time now come for George, who waited with bated breath, anticipated, to take the high road as government sleeps, on Gazans death dark secrets keep. As lobbyists keep the pressure on, no one but George speaks out on wrongs. Death and bombs, more children killed, as food supplies now burnt at will. How can the House of Commons hold MPs so weak, while George, so bold, speaks out and up for Palestine, as MPs ignore these vile war crimes? Perhaps George G. some don't rate, but at least he's willing to debate. MPs and leaders who cower in corners, shameless, as George speaks out on fauners.